Hey folks, so we're having a bit of a chat today about the world of digital theatre, and we all kind of I think agree on various elements of it and how we would like to see it move forward. I think there's an important discussion to be had about now because things are starting to open up and attitudes are starting to shift. And I think there are certain things that have come about through lockdown that are useful and important to stay going forward. So just kind of introduce ourselves. I'm Ash Pryce. I am the chair of the Edinburgh Horror Festival. I am also in the normal before times. I'm not going to say normal times. No, that's not the best way to describe it. In the before times, I was a stage magician, and I hope to one day get back to that again. At the moment, I mostly do kind of video editing and a weekly YouTube series called Spooky History. And I am joined by my wife.
I'm Theresa. I am a freelance theater producer and an artistic director with the Edinburgh Horror Festival. And I'm also disabled, so that adds a very interesting perspective to the whole digital theater aspect.
And I am Kenny Boyle. I'm an actor and playwright, and I am from the Isle of Lewis, which lets me sort of talk to the sort of rural community aspect of digital theatre making. So, yeah.
So I think just kind of when everything kind of started going south last year, 2020, there was a large growth in creativity online. And this either was places like the National Theatre that would put out their plays for an entire week on YouTube, or it was, after a while, it was work that was created exclusively and specifically for the digital world, either pre-recorded and uploaded or live streamed. A lot of places utilized Zoom, fed out to YouTube and various other networks. Places like the Show Must Go Online got people from all over the world to do all of Shakespeare's plays over the course of 2020, which was an incredible achievement. And it created this interesting hybrid of work styles, of fusing theatre and film. There was one piece that I saw towards the end of last year, which was I forget the name of it now. It was
The
an
Haunting of Emily.
Alice Bowles. The Haunting of Alice Bowles. It was a digital play, but it felt like a really creative fusion of short film and theatre. It merged it in a way that I hadn't quite seen done very often, and all sorts of things like that came along during lockdown, and it created an opportunity for accessibility because it meant people all over the world could suddenly access art and theatre and shows. It meant that people who had disabilities could engage with theatre in a way that they hadn't been able to before. Because if we take a very simple example, I have ADHD, and it makes it difficult for me to focus for long periods of time. So when we've got a 2 hour, 3 hour play, I find it very, very off-putting and difficult to engage with that. But when National Theatre made all their plays available online, suddenly I could take breaks every 20 minutes if I wanted to. I could kind of get up and wander around, go and make a cuppa, come back. And it suddenly made that theatre a lot more accessible for me. And I think it did for a lot of people as well. So I thought it'd be nice to just discuss that and going forward. And this was kind of prompted by a post that you put up the other day on Facebook. So if you could just kind of, I guess, repeat what you kind of made the points in that post.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. I think that digital theatre was and is very important, but I think that the things that are being recognised now as theatrical digital works that can be shared in the theatre community have existed for a long time before the pandemic, but were never really given any sort of recognition or utilised. They were considered to be a completely separate thing, and often weren't really considered valid. Then everything came along. The theatres couldn't physically open, they couldn't do it, so other options had to be explored. And theatres turned to these already existing creators and either brought them on board or were inspired by them and created similar sorts of things. And then suddenly it was all valid, and suddenly everyone had a chance in a way that isn't possible in a limited number of physical venues to get their work out there. Because with digital theatre, you don't need to be in a particular theatre building in order to have your work produced, and therefore more people can produce work, and there isn't the space limitation. So it was a meritocracy for a little while. Everyone could rise to the top based on the quality of their output. But now, as it's coming to hopefully the end of the pandemic, it's coming to the point again where theatres are saying, okay, we want to go back to physical theatre, fair enough. But the tone almost suggests that they want to get rid of the digital theatre aspect and move back to just what they used to do, and once again invalidate the digital output, which is a shame, because there are things that I've seen over the last year and a half that I would never have been able to get to see, because I wouldn't have been able to travel. I wouldn't have been able to afford the accommodation costs of being in London. I wouldn't have been able to afford maybe the ticket prices. I wouldn't have been able to afford that stuff, either in terms of money or in terms of time or in terms of commitment.
Yeah.
And other things that they're sort of doing is trying to find ways to monetize digital output that are unnecessary. I've seen places putting caps on the amount of tickets they can sell, even though there isn't a cap. If it's about the
bandwidth or something,
the platform they're using being able to support a certain amount of people, that's fine. But if they're creating false scarcity just in order to charge a lot for tickets, it's against the spirit of inclusivity, which I know that theatre wants to be about, or claims to want to be about. So if you want to be inclusive, then allow your product to be viewed by as many people as possible across the widest spectrum as possible. Get the message of your play out there without artificially increasing the price.
That was, I think it was, I don't know if it was the old Vic or the new Vic. It was one of the Vics that put on a show, actually a number of shows, and they capped their tickets. And maybe that was a bandwidth thing. Maybe they were hosting via their website. But there are options available out there that would get around that bandwidth issue. I mean, you can, even as something as simple as having a private YouTube page that you share the link to the viewer, maybe not as secure as on your website, but that option exists. And we watched something on Halloween, the Hocus Pocus Halloween event, which was really great. And they did that via a platform that had been set up almost exclusively for streaming digital theatre. And you could only watch it there. And it did create scarcity, as in you could only watch it there and live at that point. And it was like 1 a.m. UK time or something. So it wasn't made available for a period afterwards, which was a bit disappointing. And then there were issues, but the tickets were like a tenner each, so it wasn't too bad. But the Vic, when they did it, if you recall, they created a completely arbitrary sliding scale of tickets that were available, like £10 tickets, £30 tickets. The most expensive were £65.
But it was also, there was a set number of £10 tickets, a set number of like £20 tickets, as if you were physically in their space, and they were charging like £10 tickets as if you were sitting behind a pole in their space. Usually those seats are £10, but they were, it was bizarre. Didn't make sense.
Once £10 tickets are gone, that's it. You know, I mean, I've got an issue with shows and places that charge £65 a ticket anyway. I mean, I understand some of the arguments behind it, that there are huge costs involved in hiring a 4,000-seaters theatre, and there are all sorts of costs that go into it. But you know,
it makes it inaccessible.
It makes it inaccessible, and that's what digital theatre allowed. It allowed accessibility. And obviously the costs of doing a live stream aren't going to be as great as doing it in person in theatre. You've not got as many staff for a start. And it allows you, people are able to do this in their bedroom. So the argument of, oh, well, you know, it's going to be much more expensive because we need this camera and that camera and this 4K cameras are like, my new phone shoots in 4K. So your lighting good, your audio good. So it's like the argument of we need to charge this amount felt really unfair. And it felt really unfair that it was capped, the amount of tickets you could get, because
Also, just the arbitrary aspect of a certain number of £10 tickets versus £20 tickets, but there was no difference between those tickets other than the price.
Yeah.
It was very bizarre how they decided to charge £10 versus 20. It wasn't like £10 is for students and disabled people. It was £10 tickets for like these types of seats, but those types of seats didn't exist in a digital space.
Yeah.
So it was really bizarre how they did it.
It
And
feels almost like surge pricing, doesn't it? It feels like,
Yeah.
obviously, if there's only a certain amount of £10 tickets, then everyone needs to be there as soon as they go on sale and rush to get the £10.
Yeah.
You have to rush to get the next most, because no one's going to
Exactly.
go immediately for the most expensive ones. So
Yeah.
in a way, the
Exactly.
more popular the show, the more expensive each ticket becomes, which seems a little bit, capitalist.
Yeah.
It's very exclusive in a way as well. And
Yeah.
it kind of defeated the point of digital theater.
And that, I think, is the biggest thing. That digital theatre is still theatre a lot of the time, and there's some of it that overlaps with short film. It's a really interesting, I'm not going to say new genre because it has existed before, but it's come to prominence in the past year. And I think there's an attitude at times of treating it like live in-person theatre and not necessarily utilizing the tools available at your disposal for the digital world. The Vic did that by trying to just copy their in-person model of capped seats, of sliding scale tickets, and I think it was a sign that theaters were desperate to just get back to the old normal. And there's a lot of talk about the new normal being used in a negative way, but for me, the new normal is accessible theatre like this. And I think there's a real danger that we're going to lose this, because theatre is expensive to do, but it's turned into a situation now where anyone with the creativity in the webcam or the mobile phone can create good quality theatre and shows. And I worry that when we move out of the pandemic, that is all going to be lost, and it's going to be seen as, okay, thank you. You kind of kept the seat warm for us while we, poor multi-million-pound theatre industry, while we couldn't do our thing. But thank you to the little people. We'll take it from here now.
Or just there's been quite a number of large theaters who have gone, oh, there's been no theater for the past 15 to 18 months. And it's just, it makes you kind of go, but what have we been doing? Are we not valid theater makers? Is it because we're not linked to large theaters? Does our work not count? Is that how you're seeing things? And it's very bizarre because it's mostly London theaters who are saying things have been closed for 18 months. There's been no theater for 18 months. I don't think that's true.
No, it's not. And it's really elitist, because it seems as though Andrew Lloyd Webber, for example, is sitting there going, if I'm not the one making the shows, then the shows aren't valid. And there are so many theaters that have been embracing the digital thing and making digital theater consistently from the start of when they closed until now. They've been putting out regular digital input, whether that's live streams from their stage, shows they recorded previously, or new stuff they're making. And then Andrew Lloyd Webber and a few others come along in London and say, like, well, there hasn't been any theatre. It's like, you don't get
There's been no new shows. It's no theatre.
There's been so many new shows. Of course that. There's been new shows in London down the road from where Andrew Lloyd Webber's show is meant to be. Like, he's just it's not a good look.
It's elitist.
It is. And I think a lot of people still, I think not entirely unfairly, do see theatre as quite an elitist thing, because what they see is the Andrew Lloyd Webbers of the world, is the Broadway shows of the world, is the either what they might see as high art theatre, the kind of and I think theatre always has had a bit of an issue with appearing elitist. And I don't think that is, because if you look at the grassroots in theatre, it strives to be accessible, and it's a lot of people from various different backgrounds. And we could get into another discussion about how do we change the presentation of theatre so that we can show people that it isn't elitist, that these elitist examples are the minority out there, and that the majority of people are trying to create involved and inclusive work.
I don't think that is another conversation in many ways. I think that it not being elitist is in a way what we're talking about, because we want it to be accessible to people who can't get to the theatre. We want it to be accessible to people that can't afford it, who can't physically do it, who don't have the time, who have childcare issues, who can't physically be in the theatre. And part of what makes theatre seem elitist is that you need to have the time wealth, the financial wealth, and the mental health and physical wealth to actually go to a building at a certain time and watch a show whilst it's on. And even though that doesn't seem like that big an ask to people who are able to do it, for the people that can't, some of those things make it impossible.
It's like it. I think personally, the in-person Fringe this year is not the brightest idea, but as a concept, the Fringe has allowed me to engage with theatre in ways that I can't the rest of the year, because at the Fringe, shows are usually under an hour, which works brilliantly for my attention span and my ability to focus on things. And also the prices tend to be a little lower. Some of the places are, quite pricey, but even the more expensive stuff generally doesn't tend to be much more than 15 quid. And a lot of it is far, far less. Some of it, a lot of it even on the free or pay what you. I don't necessarily like calling it the free section, because it is a pay what you can. You should still kind of go along, and if you are able to pay something, you should. But you don't have that pressure to do so, and it makes it, again, really, really accessible for people financially. So the Fringe has always been a great thing for me and my accessibility needs, because it offers something within a shorter time span and a more affordable amount. But we kind of, again, forget that outside of those 3 weeks of August and kind of go, right, we're back to the,
charging £20 a ticket.
20, at £30 a ticket, and
for a 3-hour show instead of under an hour show, and pay what you can type models.
And
I think there's a sort of issue with funding for theatres where they can't take risks. They can't put on a show by a new writer that nobody's necessarily heard of with new talent in it, because if they fail to sell tickets for one show that they've booked out their theatre for a certain amount of time for, then they might never recover. And that's a real problem, because it makes the whole industry risk averse, which means that we don't get to see the beautiful new things that could be made, because we have to fall back on the well-known shows, the well-known writers, the well-known performers, because new things are too risky. And that's because we're underfunded as an industry. The Fringe allows for these risks to be taken, but then as soon as the Fringe is over, the risk stops too, or the risk massively decreases, except for the venues that have factored that risk into the funding that they already receive. So,
And again, this is where digital theatre provides options, and it provides outlet. And I mean, there's some theatre shows that I've done digital, and they've said, I mentioned it earlier with the Hocus Pocus thing, where it will go out at this time, and after it's done, it's done. And I'm not a massive fan of that, because I think there are some situations where I can understand why that's done. I get that there's certain situations where it fits better for whatever reason, but at least, even if you're not making it publicly available, at least allow people to purchase tickets for a week afterwards to be able to watch a private stream. Like, I don't understand why that's not a thing. Like, I can totally understand why theaters might go, right, this is going to stream on YouTube, live show. You can comment live as it goes along, which is a really great thing about the digital world, actually. People being able to actually directly interact with the theater that's being made in a way that doesn't disrupt the theater. The digital world does allow that accessibility, and it allows my point was about the arbitrary cap, wasn't it? I don't understand why more places aren't going, okay, well, you've paid for your ticket for the live stream, it will be available for even just 48 hours afterwards, and you can buy extra tickets for 48 hours. There was a lecture I heard about on Twitter. It was about a spiritualism book that was really interesting, and I saw it after the lecture had gone live, and I was like, oh, I'm gutted about this. And so many places are like, well, once it's gone, it's gone. So I just kind of message them and say, hey, is this going to be available? Expecting to be told no. And I was surprised to hear that, it's going to be on our YouTube on Friday. And
That's really nice to be able to go back to lectures, especially when it's lectures in theaters, because sometimes you don't fully absorb it the first time around. And just because either brain fog or attention issues, or just because it's a complex piece, sometimes you need to see it again.
I was disappointed with how surprised I was that they were making it available longer term.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, something that's happened in the past few months as things have started to open and change, that it's digital theatre is starting to become scarcer.
There's a push to go back to what things were before, where digital theatre is no longer valid, which removes accessibility.
Yeah. We have demonstrated over the past year that people will watch digital theatre. We've demonstrated that there is an interest in digital theatre. And sure, when we go back to opened up, that interest may be slightly less, but it will still be there. We don't refuse to do something just because the interest wasn't at the level it once was. You know, if only 1 or 2 people in the world are watching digital theatre, then okay, maybe then in that scenario, we drop it. But, you know, we look at things like YouTube. They, you know, even before the pandemic, shows on YouTube were a thing. Storytelling sessions on YouTube were a thing. Theatre was a thing. And yeah, I maybe wasn't as aware of it then as I was during the pandemic, but it existed and it was getting views. So there's definitely an interest out there. There's definitely an audience out there. And it would be a shame. It would be a crime to completely go back to what the old normal was. And I think that the theatre industry and theatre makers need to continue to embrace this as its own thing. I think it's definitely bits of theatre, it's definitely bits of film, it's bits of both, it's both, it's neither. It's this, and I hate saying a new genre because it has existed before, but in terms of prominence, it is a new style. It is a new platform.
It's experimental in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because there's still no set definitions as people are exploring.
Yeah.
Because we're still even though it has existed before, it's always been in a more experimental and kind of exploratory thing. There is no set definition yet. And I think that's something that the pandemic has been pushing us towards seeing what the definition is.
I think we need to remember the positives that we've taken from the past 18 months and not let the good things go just because for maybe the majority of people, they can now return back to how things were. Because there is a substantial minority of people who, for whatever reason, aren't able to go back to that old normal and have found, either from an audience point of view or even from a theatre maker's point of view, that they have something now that they can embrace, that can work for them. And like as I've said, with me and my ability to focus, affected by my health, it makes digital theatre and that world accessible to me in a greater way than live theatre ever has.
I think that, so I spoke to quite a lot of people that work in traditional theatre over the course of this, and quite a lot of them are desperate for things to go back to as it was. And I think part of that comes from, first of all, there's a fear, I think, amongst producers of theatre that creating digital theatre will cannibalize the audience for live theatre. And I don't think it's true, because for one thing, Hamilton was on Disney Plus near the start of the pandemic. I watched Hamilton on Disney Plus. It did not make me think I will never go see that live. It made me think that would be nice to go see live once I can afford it. And I wasn't going to go see it before I saw it on Disney Plus, if you see what I mean. So actually it created a new audience. But another thing that I think a lot of people are missing, and it's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert, is the social aspect. A lot of people that I know, and this is reviewers, theatre makers, people that just go to the theatre a lot, say, I don't like watching plays where I can't go into the bar in the interval and talk to people and see who's there and meet people. And the things they're missing are the things that terrify me, because I've got social anxiety and those situations are horrible, and I'm missing them. But they need them. That's what theatre is to them. The social aspect is really important. So I think in supporting digital theatre, it's kind of important to let people know that we're not trying to detract from traditional theatre. They can coexist. Traditional
they should.
Exactly, yeah. Traditional theatre is not losing out by digital theatre existing. If anything, they might see an increase in their audiences as more people start to feel theatre as part of their personality, something they relate to. And they'll see an increase in their profits if they even charge a tiny bit for online tickets, because the people watching the shows wouldn't have been watching the shows otherwise.
Well, that's another important point, that people might find something online and go, oh, well, I'm sat in my home with my cup of tea and my pajamas, may as well give this a go. They're engaging with things that they would never have gone to see. Like, for example, the National Theatre's Treasure Island. I'm not a massive fan of the Treasure Island story. I certainly 100% would never, under any circumstances, have gone down to London to watch Treasure Island at the National Theatre. I would just not have done it. But you know what?
It was really good.
It was fantastic. And
it was really, really good. But it's not something I would go out of my way to go to a theater to see. Yeah. It didn't seem like something I would enjoy based on the description, based on the promo images. Once you sat down to watch it, you go, actually, I would enjoy seeing this live.
Yeah.
But seeing it digitally first showed you, wait, this is actually a lot better than I thought it was.
It opened it up to people in ways that it hasn't done before. And another example is, this is a film rather than a stage show, but I saw the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I have to see this live. I have to see the stage show. I would never have done that had I not been sick on New Year's Eve 1999 and just been in my granddad's room watching whatever was on. And like, people get to be introduced to things that they wouldn't ordinarily have been introduced to through digital theatre. Digital theatre, even if you're looking at it from a cynical marketing point of view, it's an easy way, especially if you've got it pre-recorded already, and it's an easy way to just kind of get it out there and for people to see it and go, oh, this is for me. I will now go and see this in person, or I will go and see something like this in person, or I will go and see the work by this company in person. And I think digital theatre, I mean, there is a hierarchy in theatre. Let's face it. There is a hierarchy in what is real theatre. And I think digital theatre had long been seen as the bottom rung, and something no one was interested in. And then it was seen as a necessity, but wasn't necessarily respected by the more elite elements of the theatre community, which is why we're seeing it essentially kind of being dropped in various areas, and moved away from by the large places. And I think, again, it's a point we've made several times. We come back to digital theatre is a kind of equalizer.
Especially for audiences, because like, I grew up in a rural community. It was an hour drive for us to get to the nearest theater. And like, my school took us to the theater, but I was very lucky in the fact that my school was willing to get us all on a bus and drive us an hour away to go see theater shows. Most schools don't have that. Versus digital theater, you can sit in a classroom, your teacher can put it on, you can watch the theater in the classroom, you can break it up as the kids need, and it allows rural communities to actually have access to professional theater.
One thing on that, actually, and it comes back to the whole idea that digital theatre was being done pre-pandemic, and it clearly did have an audience. A lot of the larger theatres down in London, especially opera companies for some reason, would occasionally live stream their stuff to cinemas. And that seemed like a weird novelty, but now
that should be just have it streamed into people's homes. Let people who can't get out of their homes or who can't make it to a city watch.
Totally. Yeah.
There is an audience.
If you're on the Isle of Lewis, you've got one choice for theatre, and it's Anlanter. And if the show isn't touring to Anlanter, you ain't seeing the show unless you want to get a ferry and then drive for 2 hours to the next nearest theatre in Inverness. That's it. That's and that's an hour to get to the ferry, an hour on the ferry, and then 2 hours to Inverness, and then you got to go home again. So it's not happening. And having that option it's completely life changing for these communities. And the other thing about about, to go back to something you were saying earlier, I watched the final showcase performances for Lambda a few days ago. It was stretched over 3 days. And if I'd wanted to watch that final showcase performance from Lambda in person, I would have had to have traveled to London and got accommodation in London for 3 days. And then there's the associated living costs of just being in London. So being able to see that showcase performance was good for me, but presumably for the graduating actors was incredible, because now agents, casting directors, writers all over the UK, if they wanted to, don't have to devote travel time or any of that stuff or money to seeing them graduate. They just have to set aside the hour and a half that the show is for 3 nights, and then they're getting out there to a far wider audience. Why would you not want to live stream your final showcase?
And
so much better system.
And I do understand some of the arguments put forward, how it's not the same. It's not the same thing. I guess it comes back to what you were saying earlier about the social aspects of it. But also there is a very specific sensation and feeling you have when you're watching a live show, when you're there in the moment. And, you know, especially when it's shorter shows, I do enjoy that aspect. And I'm not saying that, you know, live theatre is dead and we should only do digital, obviously. But it's something that can coexist and should coexist. And I don't see why, if you've got the ability to do so, why you can't have a lot of shows recorded and then made available at a later date for people to watch. Either people who've seen it and gone, oh, I really want to see this again. Because we do this with DVDs. Like, I've got a large collection of Stephen Burkhoff DVDs of his live shows, because I really enjoy his stuff, and it's stuff that I wouldn't ordinarily be able to get to go and see. So these recordings exist.
Like, I used to watch Pippin, the VHS of Pippin with Ben Vereen. I used to watch it on repeat because it was so good and I enjoyed it. And that was the first time I actually was able to see a Broadway production, because Broadway was 6-7 hours away and it wasn't touring. There's no touring theater near me. Like, that's the best way to see Broadway shows. And it used to be people would release VHSs, because there's a VHS of Pippin and Into the Woods and old musicals. But for some reason that stopped.
That's a really solid point from both of you, actually. Like, comedians release their shows on DVD and then they do the show live and people still go see it. Like, they don't lose audience by releasing the DVDs. If anything, they gain another revenue stream and add more audience.
Yeah.
That's exactly what would happen with theatre. Like, being more visible and more accessible. The more visible you are, the more audience you draw in. Like, releasing it for a comedian doesn't destroy the comedian's career, it bolsters it.
Imagine if when you bought a theatre ticket, your ticket included and the recording of this play will be available to all ticket holders for 1 month after. And, you know, maybe they could even argue that, oh, we'll put an extra $5 on to keep it accessible for that month, you know, because obviously they're going to want to monetize it and they're going to want to do that. And that's fair enough, I think. But, you know, if you were to say, right, you've got a ticket option here, it's £20 a ticket or £25, and you get access to the stream for a month after the live show, that would be a revenue stream for them. And if I'm paying 20 quid for a ticket, I'm not going to balk too much at 25 quid for a ticket. And then be able to go, hey, this is great. I can now sit at home and rewatch this in a few weeks' time because I really enjoyed it. Because, you know, when you go to live music gigs, a lot of the time you can buy the CDs of the bands. And I think theatres could be doing that a lot more. And, you know, not necessarily have DVDs of the show available in the foyer, because sometimes that's not going to be possible. But
having it on sale on their website after, or having it where you pay to access on their website after the show, that increases accessibility. To such a great degree, and it gives them another source of income. And why are they against this? Like, there's no negatives to this unless they enjoy the elitism.
It's the illusion of scarcity.
It's the illusion of scarcity. And I think there are not everyone, you know, obviously there are so many good people within the theatre community.
Oh,
but there is a a subsection of people who do enjoy the exclusivity and the elitism and feeling as though they are a big fish in a pond that by necessity has to be small because there's only so many venues.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's the majority, but I do think there are people that will be thinking, we got to keep people out of this because we don't want to dilute.
It's the hierarchy aspect. Unfortunately, those people tend to be the like 3 or 4 that are like that, tend to be at the highest level in the industry. Whereas everyone else under them is like, yes, let's make it accessible. It's just, unfortunately, the very higher ups are the ones who kind of like the elitism.
I think there are 2 kind of camps here, really, isn't there? There is the kind of the grassroots or the kind of the working performers and companies that are kind of fighting throughout the year to kind of get work done and get work seen. And then there are the comfortable kind of elite aspects who are just like, well, we can charge £100 for a ticket for this show. People will come and see it. So, we're not going to devalue our art. We are real theatre because you're paying.
That's a weak paycheck right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is a racket, isn't it? Because actually that is a thing that's at risk. Overly extortionate theatre tickets would be less justifiable if the shows were also digitally available.
Yeah.
But reasonably priced theatre tickets would not suffer from the show digitally available. So really it's just the people that are
very high end.
Yeah.
And but then you see the high end groups like Andrew Lloyd Webber and such, they feel almost threatened, or they see experimental theater and risk taking as a threat almost, or as a bad thing. So of course they're going to be scared by this idea that inclusive theater is going to take away from the revenue because they're not used to taking risks. They're not used to doing experimental theater, and it's too new for them.
Especially if people are demanding that digital options are available and accessibilities. I mean, that's a good thing about the world we're living in, that it is changing. It is getting better, and the voices demanding accessibility and accommodations are getting louder and starting to be listened to more and more and more.
Not entirely, but
no.
Everything is slowly going back to not being accessible, but it's a fight to stay accessible right now.
But that fight is happening, and conversations like this are happening.
Yeah.
And we are far, far, far from being alone. I mean, the thread that you put up, I think everyone was very much on board with the points and the arguments you were making about digital theatre and about how it needs to remain and how it's been accessible and it's an important thing. And I guess the question now is, how do we ensure that digital theatre isn't just seen as a flash in the pan necessity for the COVID years and seen as an actual viable, realistic and respectable option for your entertainment and theatrical needs?
Yeah, and isn't seen as lesser either, isn't seen like the poor alternative to. I think it'll come down to making it part of the conversation and part of, if everyone that applies to Creative Scotland's to put on a live show says, I also want to put into this funding app that I want to make it accessible online, then Creative Scotland has no choice but to fund those if those are the again. So if everyone makes a concerted effort to do this, then even if there are holdouts who don't want to do it, eventually it'll become the norm, and then people will come to expect it, and that will create change.
Will push people.
Which sounds so naive because I know that change takes a long time. But
it has to start somewhere, and it has to start with people who want to make the change.
I think there's also, I mean, it started, I guess, when YouTube really came to prominence, people creating work in kind of non-traditional ways. Because, I mean, you look at some YouTube stuff and it's very much its own genre. It's like you could only really describe it as a YouTube series because that's the best way to describe it. Like Spooky History, the show that I do, is it a documentary? Is it a talk? Is it a lecture? What is it? It's a YouTube show. And I think certainly the upcoming generation, Gen Z, and behind them, Gen Alpha, are a lot more tech savvy. Like we're in the age group that kind of, we came into young adulthood, and things like YouTube was still just in their infancy. In fact, YouTube was 2005, so I was 23 when YouTube kind of launched. But Gen Z have emerged into that world. Gen Alpha are younger than iPhones. So we're living in a world.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
We're living in a world where this type of interaction is the norm for a lot of people. And sure, there's always going to be a demand and interest in live performance from both an audience point of view and a performance point of view. I mean, the stuff I do works better live. I just can't really do a lot of what I do digitally. I've tried, it's not really worked as well, and I've kind of accepted that what I do
it's because you need the interaction.
Because I need the direct person-to-person contact interaction with a lot of the stuff that I do. But I do intend to make that stuff digitally available for a viewing audience. It's something that I'm planning to do from now on, is to ensure that my shows are available digitally for people who want to view, because I wasn't being as accommodating and as accessible with my stuff before this, because I hadn't quite realized, even though I was experiencing it myself and was like, no, this type of stuff would be good because it would be good for me as well. I hadn't kind of realized that, oh, we can do this, that this is a realistic option. It was like, oh, well, I'm just competing with other YouTubers, so, it's difficult to do. And then this whole pandemic hit and something went off in my brain of, oh, actually, we can do this. We should do this. And offensively, we should have been doing this sooner.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have taken a global pandemic for us to realize that this is the type of thing we should be doing and making available.
Totally. And no one seemed to realize. And going back to that social aspect about the people who are missing the social aspect of it, you've got to think about the social aspect for people who are isolated as well. Because I remember we were doing a murder mystery in a small Ayrshire village, and Ayrshire has theatres, like we were performing in a community hall, and the Air Gaiety is fantastic, and it's really accommodating. It's a really community-led theatre, and the Palace in Kilmarnock is also really good. But this fella was at one of our gigs in a community hall, and he came up to us at the end and he said, like, since my wife died, I don't talk to anyone, and you coming to this community hall meant I could come to this, because I can't make it to Ayr. I can't make it to Kilmarnock, and you being here has let me talk to people and given me a reason to talk to people next to me, given me a reason to talk to you, given me a reason to be out the house. With digital theatre, I don't know, have either of you seen anything that Pitlochry Festival Theatre or the Lyceum put on their soundstage?
No,
not
I haven't.
recently.
Okay, so they did soundstage, and one of the things they put in was a digital bar where you can walk around, you've got your little cursor, you move your little person around, and you join conversation circles. And when you're in the conversation circle, you can talk to everyone else like a Zoom chat in that conversation circle, and then you can move away and join another conversation circle, and it's laid out to look like their bar.
That's amazing.
That's
it's
incredible.
so much less intimidating. See, if you see someone there, you walk into their circle, you don't feel like, I don't want to interrupt them, because that's the whole setup. And I talked to people in those digital bars that I would never have spoken to in real life, because like there was this old couple who just popped into our circle and said, like, hello, we noticed everyone's talking, we thought we'd come and have a chat to you. And in real life, you'd be like, that's strange, and they wouldn't do it, and you probably would feel weird about them doing it. But in the digital space, these isolated people felt that they could just pop in and have a conversation with everyone else that was there to see the show. And I don't see why you'd want to lose something like that when
That's
people
fantastic.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a really good system. And there's the chat function during the show
Yeah.
earlier as well, which is,
Yeah, that's really good, because I mean, from a performer's point of view, we like to see people say nice things about us. It's like it helps. And you can see that in the chat function. But also the good thing about that is you get confirmation that what you are doing is appreciated by an audience. That people are genuinely enjoying it, because unless
people aren't clapping just because everyone else is clapping.
Yeah.
That is the whole social pressure in a theater. Somebody's clapping, then everyone joins in, and you're like, are they clapping because they enjoyed it or because everyone's doing it? Which one is it? Versus in a digital space in the chat, if they're doing like the clap emoji, it's not at the same time. Yeah. They're clearly enjoying that little section, which is cool.
Yeah, and you see people interacting in comment threads, and it's really nice to see, because you kind of know that, okay, maybe they miss a little bit of it, but it's a YouTube stream. They can go back and watch it at a later date. And it's really nice to see that type of audience interaction, because you don't for obvious reasons, get that type of interaction with live in-person shows because people can't sit in the audience and natter. But they shouldn't. But with digital shows, you've got that option for people to kind of just engage with each other, to meet new people, to engage with, because obviously members of the cast and crew, or members of the crew at least, who aren't involved in the live stream, who maybe help with design or something beforehand, a poster or something, can be there as well, and you can interact with people involved in the production. You can interact with other performers. You can interact and meet new people.
As a producer, I like to sit and watch the chat and sometimes like talk to people while he's like performing in Zoom, and like I've helped him set up. I know I set up his camera, I set up all of that, but watching and chatting with audience members during it is really rewarding in a way that you don't get.
Yeah. How many times have you been to a live show and you've thought something during it like, oh, I need to look into that, or I need to check that out, or that would be really interesting. And then you just completely forgotten. Whereas with the digital option, it's like, oh, that's interesting. More information on that. And people can come back, like your producer can come back with, here's a link to our social media. Here's a link to other stuff we're doing.
Like during his shows, I will be like, if you want to find out more about see our longer shows and stuff, I'll put links in the chat, which is fantastic. And it's great for people to go, okay, I really did enjoy this. Here's the link. I can save it for later. Instead of them having to go, what was that guy's name? It was a 5-minute set, but I don't really remember.
Oh God, yeah. Especially cabaret shows.
Especially cabaret shows, especially because it's so many small chunks. How do you remember a name?
Oh God,
you're seeing them live.
There's a number of cabaret shows I've been to, and I've really enjoyed that act. And then I've gone out of the theatre, and the name's gone out of my mind. It's like, I can never find who they are again. Hopefully I'll see
so many more positive reviews because we're doing digital shows, and at the end of the digital show we go, if you enjoyed this, pop on Facebook, give us a nice review, and they're at their computer. They just go,
they don't have to go home and remember to do it. They can do it while they're
from the point of view of creators, it allows us to better interact with our audiences in a way that we could never have with live shows. I mean, there's how many times have you done a show and you've kind of left and gone, oh, actually, I don't think that went very well. And there's kind of no way to know how the audience genuinely feel. You might just be having a bad mental health day and have just interpreted it as being a really shit show when actually the audience have genuinely enjoyed it.
Or sometimes with your shows, people don't applaud because their brains are catching up with everything because his is magic. So people are like, wait, what did I just see? And their brains are processing it. So they're not applauding. But then you talk to them afterwards and they actually really, really enjoyed it. So you don't have the instant feedback.
And you'll probably have noticed this as well, that sometimes you just get listening audiences. You just get an audience. You might be doing like what you think is a really good comedy, and you just get a few titters throughout it, and you're going, oh, this must have gone really, really badly. But it's a listening audience. And you kind of get that weird phenomena where an audience will collectively be one way for whatever reason. Like, you'll get an audience that for whatever reason is riotously laughing at every little bit and every little gag. And then the next audience is just like, okay. And it's not that they're not enjoying it. They're enjoying it in their own way, but it does kind of leave you as a performer going, oh, did I do a bad job today? And, I think digital allows people to kind of engage with their audiences, and it's nice to get real world feedback. And, if you are doing something that you think is really good, but actually is a bit shit, you do kind of get that option of more feedback in a safer environment. Because I think as people are, I don't know, maybe not actually, maybe not anonymity on the internet. But you know what I mean? This ability to interact with an audience in a way that you couldn't at all do in live space is beneficial to us as creators.
I suppose the thing about the internet and internet audiences is that the anonymity of the internet does allow them honesty. And if you get enough honest arseholes telling you something was bad, then maybe there's something in it. So that's not the kind of thing that people would say to you face to face. When you finish a show, if you talk to the audience, they're either going to say, oh, I loved it, and this is what I loved, or they're going to go, well, the lighting was good. They're not going to tell you what they hated. Whereas online, they will jump to tell you what they hated. And if it's one or two people hating something, then they're probably just horrible people. But if it's a lot of people, then you can say, well, that's something I maybe should take on board. And that's valuable. And I think live theatre isn't going to die. It's been around for as long as written history.
Yeah.
We're not going to lose that unless the government keeps on cutting all the funding, and then we might. But that's not. It's not going to be taken out by digital theatre. But live theatre and digital theatre aren't against each other. They're two branches of the same thing that should work together rather than opposing each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going forward, it's important that we continue digital options. It's important that we continue to create exclusively digital work as well. I think it's important that we continue to engage with audiences to make accessible theatre. And if, when we open up after the pandemic's gone, if digital theatre gets relegated again to this niche, weird little thing that no one really wants to put any money into, or any respect into, that would be a shame.
We run the risk of losing a lot of audiences, and we run the risk of losing a lot of new experimental work, because you can put more risk into digital theater than you can a real something like at the Capitol Theaters. It's harder to put on something that's risky in a 4,000 seat theater versus something digital. Digital work allows you much more risk taking and experimenting and just trying new things, and it also reaches audiences that can't get to theaters, and if we lose that, we lose those audience members.
So we've never had an international act at the Edinburgh Horror Festival because we're still at kind of a stage of the Edinburgh Horror Festival where
most people are Edinburgh based
or a bit further afield, but it's not really like a £3,000 flight and accommodation stuff from the States. You're probably not going to make that back from doing the Edinburgh Horror Festival yet. We are still building. But last Horror Festival, because we were purely digital, we had an act live streaming from Las Vegas. We would never, maybe
we had a Vegas show performer perform at the Horror Festival.
Maybe in a few years' time, you could justify coming overseas for the EHF once we've kind of built up a bit more, because it takes time for these things to build, obviously. But like that was incredible. It was absolutely fantastic having an international act and actually feeling like an international event. And we had people from all over the country as well who wouldn't be able to come up because even for a Fringe where you're doing a lot of shows and you can take a lot of money, it's still very, 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 very difficult to break even if you're coming from outside of the city, even for something like the Fringe. So having the digital component allowed for the Edinburgh Horror Festival to embrace performers from anywhere and everywhere at no real, or at least not the same level of financial risk that they may have had they had to come up to Edinburgh, had they had to find accommodation in Edinburgh. And I think just what digital offers is something we desperately don't want to lose. And it's something that I don't think we realized just how vital and important it was.
I don't think I realized how important digital theater was until basically I had Shield for the last year. I wasn't able to really go out. Even seeing friends outside wasn't a possibility over the last year. And since I've had multiple viral infections and my health is getting worse, I'm being stuck inside more and more, unable to leave my flat. And digital theater is kind of a lifesaver. It gives me the art. It gives me the social aspect. And I don't want to lose that. And there's plenty of people like me who physically can't leave their flat on some days, who have to lie in bed because of heart rate issues or muscle issues or things like that. The fact that they can see theater shows, that's amazing. You can bring theater shows into care homes that way without bringing in the risk of outside viral infections. Because during flu seasons in the States, when my grandmother was in the nursing home, there were times where nursing homes allowed no visitors at all. So those people were even more closed off. But you could bring digital theater in because all they need is a screen and internet. And they have that. And it allows all the residents to sit as if they're in a proper theater, but without bringing performers in to, it protects their health.
I think even
imagine a world where, in the same way that when a new episode of Loki comes out on a Wednesday and everyone watches it, when a new play comes out, it's accessible enough that it becomes part of like the cultural conversation, not just amongst a small bubble of people who live near the theatre or who are regular theatre goers, but in a larger scale across the entire country, because everyone can watch that play on the day it comes out, and then you can talk to your colleagues about it. You can be part of.
It was like that with Hamilton.
Yeah, right.
Remember when Hamilton first went live on Disney Plus? The entire internet was talking about it.
Yeah.
And that level of accessibility to the theater is amazing, and it's something that we shouldn't let go of.
Yeah.
That we need more theater like that, where it is that accessible.
People are fighting back against the idea of a new normal, but this is a new normal, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. And you were saying earlier about the kids who are younger than iPhones. They don't consume content in the same way as older people do. Digital content is primary for them. For us, it's always felt secondary, but for them, digital is where they're going to go first. So if you want to make theatre accessible to the people who are growing up just now, who are going to be your audiences of the future, then you got to give them the content the way that they want to consume it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that is the type of thing that could cause theatre to seriously decline if we don't realise that attitudes and audiences are going to change.
They're going to change. It's part of cultural shifts. It's part of evolution of the arts. Like the type of theatre that was being shown back when Shakespeare was around is very different than what we see nowadays in theatres. And it's part of how theater progresses. We have to learn to adapt and evolve to our audiences.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen that there is an audience for this. There probably always has been. We didn't see it. Maybe we ignored it because we just weren't engaging with it, or because it wasn't presented in a way that we were aware of.
We also didn't have the tech until recently, because Zoom wasn't really around.
Of course.
Skype didn't have nearly the same type of options as Zoom does. YouTube has improved, and certain softwares are getting better, but up until 5 years ago, I wouldn't say digital theater was necessarily easy for us to do in our own home, versus now we have the tech at our fingertips for basically free.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, there are free alternatives, things like Premiere Pro, and very easy to get hold of and to use. And pretty much everyone has got a movie camera device on them. I think digital theatre is something we need to continue to embrace. It would be a crime to let it go. It offers so many advantages in terms of accessibility, in terms of creativity, in terms of flexibility, in terms of capitalism. It does offer so much, and we absolutely should fight to retain it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think that's coming up for about an hour now. So
yeah.
Should we stop recording? Okay.
Yeah.
Stop recording.
I think that feels like a sort of a good place to call it.
Yeah.
Call it quits on that. Yeah.
Okay. I think that is a natural kind of place to end. You can find me on most social media, I guess. I just go to spookynerd.co.uk. Most of my stuff's on there. Edinburgh Horror Festival, quite easy to find. And even if there is a live in-person component this year, there is going to be a large digital element to the Edinburgh Horror Festival, and I would like to see that continue.
And I want to try to convince all of our theater makers basically to kind of sign off and let us live stream their shows and stuff, or at least have a digital recording. Because I know the venue that we primarily use does have the internet capacity to let us live stream out of there. So I want to see that be a thing this year, and that's the goal.
Good. Yeah. And I can be found on all the social medias as well. Mostly Facebook is where I actually bother to go, but I'm on Instagram and Twitter as well. If that's your chosen platform, just don't expect me to engage with you regularly.
Okay. All right. It's been good chatting.
Yes.
Yes, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, bye, folks.